Men, we are in a great war, and you are in a battle. God made you to stand and fight, and to build his kingdom. Jesus shows us how to do both. Join us as we together follow him, the Blueprint for Men. Welcome to the Blueprint for Men podcast. We are so glad that you are here today. And we're sticking to doing our themes. And so this theme for this month in February is on men and mental health. And as Marty and I were discussing how to do this and who to bring on, he just said, almost secondhand, he said, we should have a woman in here. And I said, I know somebody. So we have a podcast guest this week. Her name is Charla. She is a friend of mine and a mentor of mine. A number of years ago in 2017, I went through the inaugural course that Four Streams Coaching was offering as their first class in learning how to be a life coach. And she was the main teacher of that. And so she had, up to that point, done a lot of teaching of coaching back then. And not to mention also, one of the biggest reason why she's on our podcast as a guest here this month is because she's got also a strong background in biblical counseling. And so with that, I wanted to welcome Charla, but also double check with Marty. And are there any updates, Marty, that you want the guys out there to know about with our ministry?
Well, at the beginning of the year, I think it's just a reminder for anybody that might be a men's leader is this is a great time to circle the wagons and get guys together and do a men's breakfast, kind of lay out a plan for the year. Hopefully you've got that on your radar and you're making plans to do that. Guys can get behind a program that has a plan. So whatever your plan looks like, even if it's only just a few things, getting something launched, make sure you communicate that and start building those relationships. And also just, I think all of us as men, we need to work on our relationships. There's nobody that can say, yeah, I got this, because it's a moving target. Our kids get older, we get older, situations change, and we need God's help and his wisdom to navigate that. So I'm glad Charla's here. A little bit of a different take from the standard therapist, which I honestly appreciate, a biblical counselor and coach. So I'm looking forward to this, Mike.
Yeah, me too. So I'm going to include in our notes, if you're listening to this and you want to start a men's ministry in your church, Marty wrote the document, was it 7 steps to starting a men's ministry in your church or something like that?
Yeah, 7 steps to launching a men's ministry at your church. So it really is super simple. It doesn't get you too far down the road, but it builds a solid foundation. And that's what I see a lot of times. Guys want to get off and doing stuff, but they don't really have a good foundation that they're putting in. So if you just go to the homepage, blueprintformen.org, and download that ebook, there's links in the ebook that take you to everything from spreadsheets to a way to join a leadership academy. We call it Men's Leadership Academy, that meets every month. We just had it this week. Our next one will be February, I think 17, something like that, maybe a little later. But yeah, just feel free to reach out to me anytime, guys, and glad to set up an appointment and see what we can do.
Yeah, for sure. Same here. And so we'll include a direct link to that document for you in our show notes. So with that, I wanted to just transition to you, Charla. Welcome. And thank you so much for coming here to just talk about this. As we had a conversation here yesterday, just you wanted to know more about what this was about. And really short sentence, I would say, we're looking for a woman's perspective on men's issues as you've experienced them. So, but before that, I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure some people would like to hear, how did you get into biblical counseling, and how's that been for you through the years, as well as then like leading into the world of coaching?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you guys having me here. I hope I can add something to this topic as a different gender. Biblical counseling, let's see. So from the time I was young, I've always been a place that people have seen, they come to me with their problems.
Oh.
Even when I was too young. And so I see it definitely as something God put in my life from an early age. And then when I was in a church, probably back in 2005, 2006, one of the leaders in the church said, "We see something in you," and they offered to pay for my first classes at CCF. The intro to, it's called Dynamics of Biblical Change with David Powelson. And so I tried it out. I said, let's see what this is going to be. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology. When I went and got that bachelor's degree, I was not a Christian yet. And then became a Christian. And then, after going to church, this church leader said, we're going to start a biblical counseling center and we want you to be part of it. So we're going to pay for that first class. And I was hooked. I was just hooked. I could see things in that first class that were so much more truthful, helpful, applicable to changing your life than anything I'd done in 4 years of studying psychology in a university system. And so that's how I started. And then from there, my pastor at the time, Russ McKendry, he started a biblical counseling center, and he ran that from 2006 to 2019, at which point he retired and I took over as executive director of Denver. We've gone through name changes. So we were Denver Biblical Counseling Center, and now we're Denver Counseling and Coaching. And the reason we changed our name is because Russ was well known for meeting with many, many non-Christians, people who were very interested in finding answers to their life, but not necessarily followers of Jesus. And he found that with the biblical term in it, those people were afraid to come. They didn't want to have the conversations. And so just the simple change in the name to Denver Counseling and Coaching, those people were willing to come. And we do, I would say at this point, we probably have 40% of the counselees that we work with are not Christians. And they value what we do as biblical counselors because there are answers in the gospel, whether you believe in Jesus or not, and they see their lives changed.
That's what kind of wanted to ask, if someone's wondering. So if you had a degree in psychology, you had that perspective that you brought to then learning about biblical counseling. What's the difference then between the two? Obviously there's the Bible that's involved in biblical counseling, in the gospel, as you just said. But when it comes to the therapeutic approach, how does that change, or what's the differences for people who might seek out biblical versus therapy counseling?
Yeah, there's huge debates that go on around that. And so there's so many ways I could answer that question. But I will say the primary thing that's unique about what we do at DCNC is practical application of what Scripture says to do about the problems in your life. And so people will come in and they'll have a presenting problem, and we're going to work through the difference between the presenting problem and the actual problem, which I think secular psychology does as well, right? Secular counseling does as well. But then we're going to look to Scripture and say, what does God say about the actual problem? What does he say to do about the actual problem?
Gotcha.
And so, we're looking for the root issues and not just looking at relieving the fruit, which may be pains in your life or things you're not liking in your life. That would be the fruit that people are coming with. But we're going to get down to the root, and we're going to have a biblical answer to how to solve that root problem.
Got it. And so when I met you, this would have been 7 or 8 years ago now. And so as I understand it, you weren't more than 2 or 3 years into coaching at the time. So there was a season in my life at that point where I was interested in coaching, especially coaching men and coaching men to quit pornography, because I wanted to find out how to help people create a set of goals and their milestones, and just also but getting deeper into things about their life. So when I met you, you're just getting started with, or I think you're about to start a school of coaching. And so, how did coaching come into your life, and did that enhance your biblical counseling? I know it didn't, only because I remember at the time the training we always wanted to separate counseling versus coaching. And to this day, when I talk to people, I differentiate what coaching is from counseling. But I'm wondering, like, how did that enhance, or at least and maybe did it help or hinder, or did it just open up more doors for you to be able to learn more about how to help people with the coaching as well? How did that appeal to you?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot. And I think my counseling is significantly different now as a coach than it was when I began. And one of the main things that you might remember we taught you, Mike, is that you're not the expert in someone else's life. They're the expert. And that relief, like that weight off your shoulder of having to be the expert, I think is one of the primary things that changed the way I approach both my counseling and my coaching. I would say at this point, I very much take a coach approach to counseling, which means that there's a lot more questions and curiosity. I don't assume I know. I'm comfortable with showing up as an idiot who's clueless about what's going on. If someone comes in with a diagnosis or tells me they have a problem, I am going to spend a lot of time in curiosity asking, what does that problem mean to you? As opposed to assuming because you've named it something that I understand what that means. So the coaching really I think it's brought a lot of freedom to what I do as a biblical counselor. And I see it show up in more and more in what I do every single day.
Nice. Well, we wanted to bring to the audience your perspective on these men's issues. So many places we could start. I guess I'll ask you, Marty, to start with, like, what was going through your head? Maybe you can't remember this. What about men and men's issues would you like to ask Charla to bring to us, that she can, we've got a background now of where her experience lies. She's got nearly 20 years of counseling and with people and couples and families, I assume all the range. I know in my conversations with you, and you know where I came from, where I decided to come into coaching, and that is helping men with quitting pornography, which has led me down this path, and here I am. But anyway, Marty, I'd like to just check with you on, like, what would you like to bring to Charlotte to ask her that we can help some guys with out there?
Yeah, I go a lot of different directions, but I'd like to get really specific because I think that guys that are listening like specific stories, specific illustrations. What are the takeaways? So I want to ask you, because I talk to a lot of guys, highs and lows of life are, and typically when a guy is open is when he's broken. And so just from your experience, and I know there's coaching would tend to be guys that are wanting, and gals that are wanting to step up in their life. Those that are more in the counseling mode are trying to repair the brokenness. And so there's this interface that I'm hearing there. Am I correct? Is that kind of a way to think about it?
Yeah.
And I know that they overlap, but yet I would say most people that are, it's kind of like if you're playing a football game or whatever, and you're on the bench, you're not really wanting to get out there and score a touchdown because you're injured, you've got a broken leg. And so you need to get healing before you can really start playing the game hard again. You might think about it and you got to go through therapy and all that, but the whole thing is it's too early to actually get out on the field. And so that's what I see with a lot of guys is that, guys are very difficult because they are the last ones. This is what I shared. We had a men's breakfast just a couple of weeks ago at our local church where I'm the men's leader. And I just shared with the guys, I said, men's ministry, just that two-name combination is like oil and water, because men don't want to be ministered to because inherently that means you're weak. If I need help, I'm weak, and I don't want to acknowledge I'm weak or I've got problems. And so it almost is necessary I think this is God's way, is that guys have to go through a broken state before they will actually be rebuilt into what God wants them to be. It's rare the man that takes it from the gate, from the time he's a teenager, and just kind of walks the path. So my question to you is, from your experience working with men, what are the major pain points that you have presented? And what do you do?
So the question I think you're asking is, what do they tend to come for counseling? What are they asking for help with? Okay.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, what's the number one thing? Just start with that. What's the number one thing? Where's the pain?
It's a variety. I don't know if there's a number one.
Is marriage not the biggest thing that is the problem in life?
Fewer men come to me for that. The wives tend to come more first,
Okay.
and then the men will show up in cooperation.
Gotcha.
I do have some men who come for marriage. It is seldom that the man's coming first.
Yeah. And that's so true. And that's unfortunate, because then the woman's taking the lead and the guy's just kind of sitting there.
Yeah. Men come for, I'm trying to think of, you like the specifics, and that's where my head goes to. I go to the specifics. So I'm actually thinking of different people I've worked with. A common theme has been lack of fulfillment after years and years and years of dedication to a career that did not give them the meaning they thought it was going to give them. And what do I do now?
So what do you tell them? I know it's a big thing, but
Yeah. And so there's usually a working through of, who are you? Who did God create you to be?
That's good.
Where are your strengths? What brings you joy? So there'll be a lot of time assessing what does bring you joy. Where is the meaning? Where is the fulfillment in your life? And sometimes it's, how do you find that in the day-to-day of your current career, because there's no way of walking out of that at this point. Sometimes it's, okay, your career is crushing you and it's not time for that anymore. They're often on that hamster wheel, well, after this next promotion, I'll hear that a lot. After this next promotion, then I'll be able to go do the thing that I love. And I will help them find a way to either acknowledge that it's time to leave, if that's what they come to. I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, by the way. It's going to be a looking at who you created to be and how are you showing up in that more and more in your life. Can that happen in your job? Does that need to happen alongside your job, or do you need to leave your job for that to happen?
Gotcha. Yeah, that identifying who you are is what I we go through a lot of different men's curricula, a lot of it video based and books and whatnot. But one of the messages I tell guys, and that's what you're kind of saying here, is sometimes you have to back up to get out of the mud. You got to look back. You got to step back and to reassess to be able to go forward. If you just try to power through it, it's probably just going to get worse.
Yeah. And oftentimes the conversation becomes, how is your job a means to the end, which is fulfillment? That you may not feel it in the 40 hours you're there, but can you start thinking not just the here and now, but the bigger picture of eternity, that this job is actually getting you every day what is fulfilling, right? Like sending your kids off to college and knowing that you've done parenting well. This is something that's very fulfilling. And so you wouldn't have gotten there without that. And so helping them being able to connect what is truly meaningful with some of the mundane stuff that they have to do every day.
Gotcha.
Have you run into husbands or boyfriends, for that matter, that as they're connected to their wife, their girlfriend, a woman, that they have to differentiate some of where they find their purpose, identity, and fulfillment as well? It's a simplistic view, but I remember learning from the book Wild at Heart, for instance, that I should not wrap my validation and purpose into my marriage, for instance. So when a guy comes to you or a couple comes to you and maybe their marriage is on the verge of collapsing, is that at all showing up in like where a guy is trying to put all of his like hopes in pleasing his wife or making sure that this doesn't happen? Because if I get this divorce, my life will just fall apart, or my world will fall apart. My whole identity crumbles. Do you run into that with guys in that situation?
Yeah, in particular, I'm thinking of a couple gentlemen I've worked with who are actually in abusive relationships. They were being abused. And in that, it can be very hard to really define what your role is. But that's primarily what I try to help people do, is what is your role in marriage based on Scripture? What does it say you are meant to be? And I believe our purpose in marriage is to be the primary agent of sanctification in the life of our spouse. I mean, our kids are number two, right? If you guys have kids, then you know that you saw yourself in brand new ways when you saw yourself through the eyes of your children. I think that God uses our spouse as that primary instrument for sanctification. And so what does it look like to show up in that role well? Whereas I think people look at Genesis 2:18 that says man should not, it's not good for man to be alone. And when I ask people, I'll ask each of you, what do you think that means? It's not good for man to be alone.
Right.
That's a real question for each of you. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think it was, it was interesting when God said it's not good for man to be alone. That was the reason they sinned, is they were separated. I know that there's debate on whether Adam was right there. If you just read Genesis, you can fall in that. But if you do a whole study of the Bible, you'll see that he was in proximity, but he wasn't right there listening. That's my take on it. But nevertheless, they were apart. And I see that so many marriage issues are when couples, they're really not spending any time together. I think it's a dysfunction in the home today. It goes from the, husband and wife not spending time, then the kids aren't spending time with their parents. And then in church, people aren't really spending time with each other. They'll go to church and it's a wonderful praise service and a wonderful sermon. They walk out the door and they didn't really have any relationship building. So I think it's all connected. We need each other to be healthy. It's also difficult, but I love what you said there, Charlotte. I wrote it down that we're to be the primary agent of sanctification in the life of your spouse. I never heard that before, but that's my takeaway right there.
Yeah, and so that it's not good for man to be alone. A lot of people answer that question as saying we're meant to have a companion. It's my spouse fulfills my aloneness, my loneliness. Whereas I think it's any of us, man, woman, are alone, then our flesh and our pride are going to tend to rule, right? And we're going to indulge the flesh. And so I help couples, I try for these men, to go back to your question, Mike, about this idea of their identity maybe being too wrapped up in their marriage. Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time for every purpose, and there's a time in which your marriage should be everything in that hour or that weekend or on that vacation. But if you look at the average day of someone's life, marriage doesn't usually take up 24 hours. It better not, because God is calling us to so many things that we're required to do. Sleep, right? There's a way to sleep to the glory of God. And marriage, oftentimes, there's too little time spent, as you're saying, Marty, but there's also not a focused, intentional quality time when you are in it. But what I find with so many people is my spouse is on my mind all the time. I'm worried about it. I'm thinking about it. Everything's happening in relation to what is going on with my spouse. And I don't believe that's what honors God. I think if it's time to work, it's time to work. And your spouse should not be interrupting that. Now, emergencies happening. I call that God's providence. right?
Yep.
And there's times God's going to step in and interrupt what it's time for. But otherwise, full focus and dedication, intention, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. Ecclesiastes 9:10. That's what we're meant to do. And so I help men and women identify, when am I actually called to my marriage, and what does it mean to show up with all my might? And then how do I have purpose and meaning in everything else I'm called to do as well?
Yeah, I've learned that when I'm trying to build my life around, will it please, first, if you start with your wife, well, that's not going to end well if you just build your life around it and then, go on down that list. And part of the reason behind the question is, like, if a guy builds his identity in his vocation, for instance, or his marriage, for instance, or his parenting, or his hobbies, all of that stuff can be taken away so quickly, or wealth, whatever. I'm just thinking of the guy who's struggling to get his identity rooted in the biblical creation of who we are, and the who God tells us that we are, first and foremost. Because I was a man before I was married, and God forbid if I outlive my bride, I'll still be a man, and nothing about that changes. And then in eternity, that is still the same. I'm still a human being. So that was the root behind that particular that question.
Yeah, you have so many rules, right?
Yeah, you do.
You're a man, you're a son, you might be a brother, you're a neighbor, you might be a father, right? You're a child of God, right? In whatever work you're doing, you may be, you're a podcaster right now, but that might not be all you do for work, right? Each of those roles, I think it's important to identify, what does it look like to show up in a way that honors and glorifies God. And what I have found is when you do that, it brings you joy. He is so kind to allow those things which he wants us to do most of the time to bring us joy.
Yeah, I think that companionship is something that does bring joy. Most people don't want to go out to eat alone, or watch a movie alone, or walk on the beach alone. Of course, there's alone times, but to answer your question, I think God, what fascinates me is that text it was the only thing not good. Even in the perfect creation, God said it's not good for man to be alone. So therefore he created Eve to be his companion, his equal. And so God saw that it was built into us. The other side to that is, if I'm not with somebody, i.e. married, then I'm incomplete. That I'm not fully human. And I'm kind of guessing you've run into that as well. And I'm wondering how you might address that. I mean, we've been talking about it, but if someone comes to you that way, who's, say, been divorced once or twice or however many times, or has never been married, and they just can't seem to find the right person, what might you tell that guy?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, Paul said, avoid all the troubles and don't get married.
Right.
Right. And so if they've been through divorce, that one's easy to help them see.
Yeah.
That you're just trading troubles, right? There's just different troubles in marriage than there are in being single, right? It's
Sure.
And again, what were you created to do? Where do you find joy? Where are your strengths? Where does God say you need to be today? And what does it look like to show up in that wholeheartedly with all that you have? And oftentimes, so many people will describe, when I'm at work, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do when I get home. When I'm at home, I'm thinking about what I'm going to do the next day at work, right? And we're always thinking about what the next thing is. And I think teaching people how to be fully present in the moment is powerful. It's powerful to change loneliness. It's powerful to change boredom. It's powerful to change anxiety, right? We're not supposed to be anxious about tomorrow because today has enough troubles of its own, right? There's enough to focus on right now and what it's time for, and helping people learn how to do that. So I mentioned with biblical application, at least what we do with biblical counseling is apply it. And so I have people create assignments for What does it look like to show up tomorrow in your list of things to do? Pray over what does it look like to honor God with each thing's in that list, right? And I actually start with waking up. What does it mean to wake up in the way that glorifies God? For some, it means not hitting the snooze button, jump out of bed. For some, it means go ahead and hit snooze, right? It takes so much wisdom to know what it means to honor God with each moment. What does it mean to honor God with brushing your teeth? What does it mean? And pray over it. Your drive to work. How do you start honoring God when you drive? Right? And process through, what does that mean? Is it honoring to listen to your podcast while I'm driving? Or do I need to be fully focused on the road? Is it honoring to eat McDonald's while you're driving, to put your makeup on? Right? What honors God while you're driving? And it takes wisdom. Some people can listen to their podcast and they're doing just fine. Other people cannot. They don't have that level of concentration to be able to do both. And so they have to assess what that means. So it's actually quite fun to have someone walk through their day and help them assess what it would mean to honor God. And I challenge them to do that every single morning. And then you will find at the end of the day that you will have more peace. It may not have been enjoyable, but you will have more peace at the end of your day. And I think that helps with depression. It helps with loneliness. It helps with anxiety. It helps with so many things.
It tells me that if you ask that question, inherently it means I have a choice on how I feel right now. If I'm going to make the next choice. If it honors God, it slows things down if you're going to do that exercise. And another piece to that was how are the small things, how do doing the small things day to day honor God or not? So I think that's part of the process, right? We're evaluating, does this honor God? Yes or no? And you're trying to find out if in these little things that we do day to day, will they honor God? Distraction's another big one. And I know that sometimes I can get distracted right down a rabbit trail and I'm far off from what I set off to do. And it's one of the frustrations about myself that I'm fully aware of. So it's just something that I know, but your point is great for guys who are distractible and guys who go through the day just on autopilot. Slow down. Ask that question. What can this do to honor God?
And do it ahead of time, because we don't always have a choice in how we feel.
Yeah.
We don't always have a choice in how motivated we are towards something. But if you've done this ahead of time, you know what your next calling is. You know what the right thing to do is because you've assessed, apart from the feelings, you've assessed what is the right thing to do. So then when you're sitting there in a moment of, I don't want to do it, then you honestly have to make a choice. Will I honor myself or will I honor God?
Right.
And when you've assessed ahead of time what it means to honor God and you're going to choose your feelings instead, you can do that. We can do that because we have a Savior that forgives us. But I think it will weigh heavier on our conscience if we've decided beforehand, this is the day the Lord has made, and to be faithful in it, I need to do this thing next. And when we don't do that, then there should be some guilt on our conscience, which then you get to the end of the day, there's not as much peace. And that's when you ask for forgiveness and you ask God to give you the strength to be able to do it better the next day.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, Charla, about the different generations. Issues are different with the generations that come along. So we've got the youngest generation right now is Gen Z, right? And then we've got the Gen X's and the millennials and the boomers. When it comes to this idea of, I don't know, there's so many issues we're talking about here, but particularly about anxiety that we see emerging with our younger adults. Do you see that in your counseling and your coaching? It could be even in the children's sector. You may be a parent and then you've got a young adult child, whatever. But what and where I'm going with this really is the biblical counsel. I mean, we can give biblical counsel, but what's your prescription for spending time with God on a daily basis. Is that part of your prescribed regimen?
Prescribed. Yeah.
Best practice, it's
Yeah,
like,
best
okay,
practices.
if you're
I
wanting to
seldom
lose
prescribe.
weight or get muscle, there's things that are going to work better than others. And so, what do you tell people?
Yeah, I seldom prescribe, but it is one of the 5 things that I want to see before I say, okay, we're going to close out our counseling relationship. I tell everyone I'm trying to work myself out of a job, right?
There you
Because
go.
they can do this with God. So I want to work myself out of a job.
Beautiful.
And so there's 5 things I'm looking for, and that's one of those 5 things. I'm also looking for social support. They need to have that social support somewhere where they're not paying somebody an hourly wage to do it, right? They need to find that in their church. They need to have community where they can do it.
Yeah,
okay. They need to know how to do a good Bible study. So I teach them how to do that, right? Not go buy a book that takes you through a Bible study, but go do a Bible study on what should I do about my anxiety? There's tons of books about that, but the way God's going to talk to them is going to look very different. So for the time with God, I love asking them, what does that look like for you when it's worked well? Or where can you most hear him? Or where are you most in tune with him? Because what I have found is most people, even young people, and I actually have a lot more young men who come to me, right? They'll come to me on their own than I've ever seen before. So that's interesting. And I think that maybe that was one of the benefits of the pandemic, is getting mental health support is something that is not so taboo as it used to be.
Yeah.
But a lot of people believe, of all ages, it seems, that there is a way to have time with God. And that is first thing in the morning. Most people agree it's okay if you make your coffee first. First thing in the morning with your coffee and a journal for an hour every day. And too many of us have an all or nothing attitude about that.
Yeah.
Whereas you wouldn't believe, I work with several men who are in worship ministries, and if they're not playing their guitar or singing, they don't have the same level of connection with God. And so I help them define when is your best time. Not everybody's a morning person, right? Some people are better focused in the evening, and God is going to get their best fruits, which is, I think, what he's asking us for, our best fruits. And so I help them figure out, when is he going to get the best of you, and when are you going to receive the best as well? And so I do say every single day it needs to happen, and it's not an all or nothing. It's not. At least do something. If you read one verse, it's better than not reading anything for 3 weeks, because you can't commit to, 10 chapters a day.
Right.
Which is what I would recommend to everyone. 10 chapters a day gets you through the Bible 3 times in a year. You can pick anything you want to study, right? Pick anxiety. You can find out in 4 months everything Scripture has to say about anxiety. So what would I hope for everyone? 10 chapters a day. But most people cannot do that. I have had one person take me up on that challenge in almost 20 years of biblical counseling at this point. And he was a pastor, and he said it was the best thing he ever did. Most people can't do that.
Yep.
It's better to pause long enough to fully concentrate on one verse than to do nothing at all. But I also ask them to assess, how do you feel? What do you experience? What is your life like? What is your anxiety like? What is your loneliness like? I have several people that I'm working with right now, young people. One of the most common struggles that I'm seeing is same-sex attraction. I was trying to figure out how to say that. Sexual identity, I'm not working with many people who have gender struggles. So it really is mostly same-sex attraction. And so I asked them, what do you see when you spend time in the Word in that challenge? Versus what do you experience and see when you're not in the Word? Because we're always looking through a lens. And the more that lens is biblical, I believe the more we're going to find peace and hope and joy. And the more that lens is our own flesh, our own desires, or the world, opinions of the world, the more we're going to find anxiety and depression and struggles.
What, this is kind of I know a fellow that has, same-sex attraction. He's struggled with that. He's married, has 3 kids. There's people like that, it's, they have struggled in life. They've gone the path that God laid out, but it's still, there's this issue that goes on because of their childhood, different issues with their dad, whatever. But I think where I feel like the gasoline's been put on the fire, because I think that teenagers go through some identity type issues, but the gas on the fire is just the pornography that has been available that shows same-sex attraction, every variety of whatever you're looking for. Do you feel like that? I mean, do you get that in your what you're doing, talking to people that have same-sex attraction? Do you feel like pornography is adding fuel to the fire? Because, in other words, do we know what to do, and do we do it? And then by beholding, we become changed over time. It's an awkward question. I didn't do very good. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I hear the question as, how much do I experience that pornography is influencing same-sex attraction?
Yeah.
She did it really well, succinctly, what you did in about 5 minutes there, Marty.
I know. I really beat around that.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, it was bad.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's coach training.
That's right.
They two absolutely go hand in hand to some degree. But
because why do we see more of it today? I guess
think
that's
it's
my
more,
question.
And I'm not sure, but I think it's more of a permissive culture. I think we are in a culture in which, especially for our young people, it is much more acceptable. And it's much more, I think there's a lot of identity confusion in our culture, because I think our culture to a large degree teaches you are what you feel, right? You are what you want. You are what you desire. And that equates to then an identity. And so what's interesting is, I don't know that there's more same-sex attraction now than there were in biblical times, right? It was clearly a problem that needed to be addressed multiple times in the Bible. But I think that it is talked about more now. I think we're allowed to express it more. And so
it's interesting, Charla. I don't know if you guys heard this today. I just happened to catch it in the news, that one of the executive orders that just came down today, did you hear what it was?
A man and a woman?
Is that they've struck down the use of any pride flags or anything on any federal buildings or anything like that. That's gone. And I think that it's even, I just pulled up my Google Calendar and put the holidays of the United States, because I saw the headline was that Gay Pride Month is gone.
Yeah, so, I'm not going to express an opinion on that.
Yeah.
But the fact that that's what it was shows, right? That was something. It's become more acceptable and permissible to share those feelings, to talk about those feelings. And I actually think it's good, because I think when we're in denial of those true things that are happening inside us, and we're not looking to Scripture to say what is truth and what does God say honors Him in it, then anything that's in the darkness is going to grow and become more powerful. And when we bring it into the light, right? Then,
Right.
and we say, God, handle this for me and show me how to handle it with you.
Right.
Then we're in a safer space than when it's not something we can talk about.
Right. No, it's so true. I think that the what you said right before was that, you know, when the society, the church affirms, then it's okay. And so a lot of things that historically have been pretty black and white have become less so.
And I will say that to affirm, I'm in agreement with affirming that it's okay to talk about what you're struggling with.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's what I don't want to see go away. And, you know, when people become afraid, and so, you know, if we look at the pornography issue, you know, men who are afraid to say what is going on, that's going to become more and more powerful in their life.
You know, an interesting thing about pornography here in Tennessee is that just as of this year, there was a legislative action. I don't know the whole history of it, but you know, logging or just going into X-rated sites used to be totally unfiltered, and kids could just go there randomly. Now it's all restricted. You have to verify that you are of whatever. I don't know what age the threshold is, but there are blocks now in the state of Tennessee that you just can't go on the internet to these sites, which I think is a wonderful thing. I think what's been happening to young people. I mean, I was exposed to pornography at the age of 10, and it didn't go well. I'll just put it that way. And I know that story from so many other men because of the prevalence of that. It's all part of the cocktail of destruction that the enemy has put together.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, and a 10-year-old coming to his parents and saying, you know, guess what I just looked at on the internet.
But they don't.
Right?
They don't tell
They're
their
not
parents.
going to, right?
No.
They're especially if they had to get around some filter that made them say they were 18 and they pulled out their calculator to figure out what year they were born if they're going to be 19. And, you know, I love those attempts at those gatekeeping, but yeah, our kids, our teens are so smart to be able to get around it. And so I think the freedom to communicate about it, the open conversation is so, so important. But I think there is a fear of if I say it, it will get stronger. I see that even with emotions. People will say, if I talk about how sad I am, or if I let myself feel my pain, it's going to take me over.
Right.
If I admit I'm doing this, then it becomes permissible, and now it's just going to take me over.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not what the research shows is true.
Mm-hmm. No, I had a student that she was one of those, you've seen these kind of people, Charla and Mike, that are just, they smile all the time. You know, it's just like smile. You just got, that's just not real, you know, and it's eventually later on in her adult life, she had a whole crash and burn situation because you just can't sustain that. One of my favorite little animated movies, Inside Out, you know, just to embrace the emotions that we all experience. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay, you know,
I think acknowledge and discuss, but don't indulge. I think that's the challenge we're trying to figure out.
Yes.
One of the more powerful quotes, I just heard it this week, and it's been around a while, obviously, but emotional sickness, this is M. Scott Peck. Emotional sickness is avoiding reality at any cost. Emotional health is facing reality at any cost. And the context that I heard it in was the Wild at Heart podcast, and these guys have been talking about this for a number of weeks now. Just this idea of it's really important that we find emotional and spiritual maturity for the time in which we live, because it's not going to get any easier. And what can men do to find that emotional and spiritual maturity? Part of what you just said is talk about it, bring it out to the open, and don't be afraid to let those strong feelings just rise, and they're not going to kill you. Nobody's ever been killed by their feelings. And so let them come as they will. I wanted to shift though real quick. I'm shifting, but not. because I really wanted to make sure we covered this in our conversation as we're kind of winding down our time here. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to ask you, Charla, is about this, and it's about pornography and men. But now you got to correct me if I'm wrong. One time in some conversation you and I had since I've known you, you said this to me. You said, I stopped asking men if they're consuming pornography. I asked them, how much are they consuming, or what's that habit for you?
Yeah.
What was that shift?
Yeah, so it was,
Go ahead.
it's interesting because I believe we have a very unique take at Denver Counseling Coaching on how to handle pornography. And it's a little shocking the way I say it at first, but if you'll hear me out, you'll realize what I mean, and I think it'll make sense to you. So most of the tactic is like nanny software and, avert your eyes and all of that.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that is the most effective way. I think it is never indulge. That is not what I'm saying. But allowing yourself to look at and face it when it is there is going to allow you to assess what's actually happening. And so I think when we avoid a problem, we don't have the opportunity to face it. Now, I believe it doesn't matter what kind of nanny software you put on. I don't care if you don't own a computer. I've watched men give up their computers and their phones. And guess what? There's a billboard, or they went to the mall. It's there. It's in your mind.
Yeah, that's it.
There are external triggers, but it is in your mind. And so our take on it is that you notice and sit in and actually sit with the temptations when they come. And so we'll have journaling exercises that people need to do. So with that thought of it's there all the time for all of us, pornography for women is there all the time too. It just looks different. The women are doing it as in, oh, I wish my man was. Right? As opposed to men might be doing it with a physical naked body image, right? Women are, I want different qualities, but all of it is an indulgence of the flesh. And so in my mind, Mike, everybody's struggling in some way. So it wasn't about their viewing. It was more, I stopped asking, do you struggle? And I started asking, how is your struggle? How is your struggle going?
Yeah.
Instead of them having to admit to something, I've already said, this is the space where it's just known. And
Right.
How is your struggle? And what's interesting is the number of times I'll be with a couple and the man will say, well, I don't struggle. And then call me later on his own and say, how do I talk about this? I couldn't say it in front of her. But just by my asking the question,
Right.
he felt safe enough to call me and say, how do I talk about this? I'm going to lose her if I tell her.
Yeah.
She's made it very clear. Women, I've heard women say, if I ever found out he used pornography, I'll divorce him. And so, of course, he's afraid to share.
Yeah.
So what's your help for someone who might be in that very situation right now, listening to this?
They need some place where they're talking this through and they're sharing this. And then it's a matter of wisdom of how can she hear it? When can she hear it? How will you present it in a way that as much as you have power over it not feeling as much of a threat to her? In that situation, it was in the context of our counseling together that we shared it. And I'm not going to reveal it, right? I need to maintain the confidentiality. So the man reveals it, but I have said he has something really hard that he needs to share with you. And then I will step in as I hear her talking about, in Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says you're lusting in your heart. And so you've committed adultery. And so now I have a right to divorce you. And I respond to that. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, if you are cursing your husband or calling him a fool, then you have committed murder. So do we have the right to put you in prison? And they want to argue how it's not the same, but I say if we're going to use the same verses for Jesus, then we need to use the same verses from Jesus. And it's hard, and it's hard for the man, but he needs to get solid in his beliefs, in what God thinks of him and believes in him. So go back to what you said before, Mike, when his full identity is in his wife or in his marriage, then he will crumble if she says, I have a right to divorce you, and that's it, it's over.
Even the threat couldn't undo him. Yeah.
And so I would recommend that person find a biblical counselor who is going to help them know clearly their identity and hopefully find ways in which, know your wife. It's so important to know your wife. How does she hear? What makes her feel scared? How do you show up with that? When you show up with, I am working on this. Here is my commitment. Here's what I'm doing. I know it feels like a betrayal, right? You come in with humility, such humility for how painful it is to her. It goes over better. It's a tough call. So I do recommend doing it with someone who's on your side.
Yeah.
And on her side, on the marriage's side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, one thing that all of these conflicts, I think that if people can see beyond the situation and know that there's a win-win, that's so helpful. Is there a way forward where both can win? Or are we going to have a winner and loser and you're bad? And you know what I mean? The shame thing getting thrown around. I don't know. Win-win.
One of the most powerful things that Russ ever taught me that I love, and there were many things. Russ McKendry that I mentioned started Denver Counseling and Coaching, was this idea that typically in our arguments, we're focused on this idea that, if you win, I lose.
Yep.
And then a next level up is that win-win. But biblically, if we really believe who we're created to be for our spouse, if we are meant to be the primary agent of sanctification in their life, if they win, we can't lose. And so if that man can show up in a way that he can help her win, meaning she doesn't have to feel totally defeated, right? She can say, I feel betrayed, and they work through that. She grows.
Right.
And so if she wins, he can't lose because now she becomes stronger for him. And if
go ahead.
If she can show up and think, okay, what does it mean to help him be a better man? What does it mean to help him win in this struggle? She doesn't lose. Everything's better for her.
Usually behind the scenes is a situation where the man feels like he's failing in multiple areas, and so he feels somewhat defeated, and I'm never going to make this woman happy. So how am I going to ever win? How is she going to ever win? Because I can't measure up, so I can't win. And she doesn't seem happy with me, so she's never going to win. I don't know what to do. And then everything's really just starts imploding. And so I guess I see, and this is one of my heart cries, is that too often, I'll just put it back on the man, he doesn't initiate enough to go get help soon enough. If he hears a noise on his car, he's going to go get it taken care of much sooner than in his marriage, And so, if a man was wise enough to initiate and say, hey, things aren't going well, let's get some help, instead of waiting to the point where the fire is out and all you've got is, a bunch of ashes. That would be my big message to guys, anybody listening to this. If you've got any problem that you're not resolving, I mean, we're all going to have problems, but when it's ongoing and it's just not getting better, get help.
No, absolutely. And it's in marriages in general. As soon as you feel a pain point, talk about it.
Yeah.
Talk about it right away. The sooner you can do it. And it's back to that idea of bring it into the light.
Yep.
Everything in darkness just gets bigger, more powerful, and gains more control. Bring it into the light as soon as you can.
That's good. We're about out of time, and I feel like I could ask half a dozen more questions for you, Charla, but I know this has been very helpful, you bringing your perspective as a counselor, as a coach, but as a woman as well. It's just, I know this is going to help so many guys. And I want to be able to point people to, if they're really interested in working with you, how can they find you, Charla? Where can they go to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the website's best. There'll be an inquiry form on the website. So it's www.denvercounselingcoaching.com. Or they can just Google Denver Counseling and Coaching.
Okay. We'll make sure that's linked in our show notes as well. And so if this is just kind of a taste of the depth that Charla can offer with this biblical counseling. She's been doing it for a couple of decades now, so she has a lot of knowledge and experience to bring. And she's worked with such a variety of people. She's been a very helpful friend and mentor through the years for me as I've learned coaching on many different levels and to be able to help other people. So I love that she said, I want to counsel myself out of a job, out of this relationship, coaching relationship, because we want, ultimately, I think a good counselor therapist is that, where we want to make sure, we're empowering you so that you can thrive. And that's the whole point of doing stuff like this podcast, for instance, but also bringing someone like you here. So Charla, thank you so much for bringing, I hope this wasn't, this was for everybody listening, Charla's first interview. So
she did great.
I think so. Great. She did a great job. So thank you so much, Charla, and I so appreciate that you could come by and spend some time with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was a joy. It's great getting to know you, Marty, and Mike. I've always admired your commitment to your faith and your calling. So happy to be here and be part of that.
Thank you, everybody, and for listening. And just remember, if you do like our podcast, we'd love it if you could rate it and review it and share it. So any further links that you need will be in our show notes. God bless. Thank you for listening to the Blueprint for Men podcast. Men, be strong and courageous and do the work. Don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He won't leave you or abandon you until all the work for the service of the Lord's house is finished. God bless.